Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink, it is time for some Path of Exile discussion. Today I wanted to put together a guideline to crafting Endgame Spell Suppression gloves. Spell Suppression is one of the best suffixes you can get on pretty much any item slot in the game at the moment, and that's why we're going to be focusing on this. Now, this is a strategy that's designed for Trade League players. That doesn't mean that solo self-found players can't use it at all, but it means that they're going to need to be quite lucky in order to get the first step, or they're going to need to make a couple of modifications and maybe compromise on the amount of spell suppression that they're chasing on their gloves. There's also being designed on a variety of budgets. The first option, the low budget ones, are going to be a little bit less than half a divine on average, although you could get unlucky and need a little bit more than that. The second option, the medium budget, should be about 3 to 4 divines, and then the higher budget ones should be in the 20 divine range, although you can definitely spend more than that, especially if you get unlucky. So the pieces we want together on our set of gloves here. We want an explicit mod that has a high tier of spell suppression. Only gloves that have a non-zero dexterity requirement can roll this mod, and it is considerably more common on items that have a dexterity requirement but that do not have a strength requirement and that do not have an intelligence requirement. We want a high spell suppression implicit mod, which is in the Eater of Worlds pool. Or maybe you might decide that you want a different Eater of Worlds mod instead, but often you'll decide that spell suppression is where you want to go there. Next, you're going to want 2 other excellent suffixes. Some examples of really good ones: you could have Chaos Resistance, you could have Attack Speed that comes from Deafening Essences of Zeal, you could have a high tier accuracy roll, you could have a needed 50 plus attribute, or a needed 40 plus elemental resist. Remember that you've got to get your attributes and your resistances somewhere. They're not particularly exciting stats, but you do need them, and you want them to be from big numbers. So you don't want to be getting 23 intelligence on one item, 27 intelligence on another. You want to be getting 50 in one place. Next, you want to have life and a good benchcraft prefix on the item. And you'll see that there'll be a big difference in the amount of life that you get between the lower and the higher budget options. Next, you're going to want a useful Searing Exarch implicit on the item. And finally, you can modify these a bit if needed too. Maybe your build needs Ignite Proliferation, maybe you need some other specific mod, in which case you can use the same overarching strategy and just make a couple of different decisions along the way. Now, overarching strategy will in some ways be based upon the strategies that are used to solve one of these puzzle cubes. The key thing is that you look for things that you can solve early, that you can then lock in. And then once you've done that, what you want to do is then construct strategies that don't change those things you've already locked in. Now, you will be more constrained on what you can do because you've got to make sure that all future steps don't brick what you've already achieved. Path of Exile crafts in general are often like this. And our approach here is going to be that suffixes come first. Suffixes are going to be like the base layer on a puzzle cube. You're going to want to get that done first, then all subsequent moves are not allowed to wreck what you've done there already. After that, we're going to get the prefixes, and then our final step is going to be Eldritch mod finalization. And it's important to do the Eldritch mods last because they will give you more flexibility in how you modify the prefixes on the item. We might be using currencies like Eldritch Orbs of Annulment or Eldritch Chaos Orbs in various points. What's the dream item look like? This is an example of something that is at the near perfect end that you could craft with this method. And the estimated cost here, and there'll be a lot of variance on this, something like 7 divines for the base. That's a Dragon Scale Gauntlets that has fractured 14% suppression on it. About 50 Deafening Essences of Zeal to get the suffixes as perfect as they are there. Then about 100 Eldritch Chaos Orbs and 2 Ashling Veils to get the prefixes right. And about 80 Grand Embers to get +1 strike target. 10 Orbs of Conflict to raise that up to perfect tier, then 32 Exceptional Ichors and 1 Orb of Conflict in order to finish it. Budget versions of these gloves are definitely possible, and the difference is that the mods will be slightly lower quality across the board, and you might miss out on some of the big luxury things like 43% increased damage while leeching. So our first step, and this is the reason I don't really recommend taking this strategy unmodified for solo self-found, is that you want to trade for your starting point. While players are running tier 16 plus maps, they're getting a lot of fractured items dropping. These are coming from rare monsters. It feels like it's 1 every 200 or so rare monsters you kill. It'll drop all of its items as fractured items. Now, among these, some of these items are going to drop as gloves, and amongst fractured pure dexterity gloves that are item level 85 or above, 1 in 228 of them will have 14% chance to suppress spell damage as a fractured suffix mod on them. And among hybrid dexterity gloves, so this is Dex Strength or Dex Int gloves, about 1 in 500 of them will have tier 1 spell suppression with a perfect roll as a fractured mod on them. Now, dexterity strength hybrid bases are generally stronger at the current state of the endgame, and that's because armor is so good right now. However, this may not be the case for your specific build. Now, Eldritch Implicits might be present on an item. This is not a problem. If it turns out that you've got a high tier Eater of Worlds mod already on the item, you can always overwrite that with a bottom tier Ichor, and that's important if at a later stage you need to make the Searing Exarch dominant on the item. So what's the difference between a high budget, a medium budget, and a low budget here? If you're on a high budget, you want to insist on Dragon Scale Gauntlets only. This is going to cost you anywhere from 7 to 10 Divine Orbs, 8 to 9 at the time I was looking. And you can filter for these by using the search string I've got up above, but also armor is greater than or equal to 120. And that will show you Dragon Scale Gauntlets and only a small number of false positives. If you're on a medium budget, then you want to accept other types of gloves. So you're not going to insist on Dragon Scale Gauntlets. That's going to be your compromise here. Still insist though on 14% spell suppression chance. In my opinion, it is worth it. You're going to be paying about 1.5 divines for these bases at the time I'm recording this video. You could go to 13%, and if you do, you'll be able to pick up 13% for about 80 chaos, but that's something that I think is not quite worth the compromise. Of course, it's up to you. If you're on a low budget, then you are going to have to make that compromise and more. You're going to go with 12% fractured spell suppression in this case, and you should be able to pick up your base for 10 to 20 chaos, assuming you're not picky about the base. And I don't think you should be picky about the base on a low budget. You can just go with something that gets the job done for now, and then later on you can come back and get a better item made to replace it. Now, step 2 of the craft is going to be to lock in all 3 suffixes, and we're going to be doing this through the use of essences. So the best other suffixes that you can get on a set of gloves are mostly essence mods. Arguably the highest power mod, although it's not appropriate for all builds, is the Deafening Essence of Zeal, which grants 17 to 18% attack speed. And if you're on a lower budget, 14 to 16% that you get from Shrieking Essences is also pretty good as well. If that's not appropriate for your character, you can consider a resist essence, such as Deafening Essence of Envy to get chaos resistance, or one of the 3 that grants elemental resistances, or you can go with an attribute essence to get yourself 51 to 58 to a stat that your character needs, or you can go with some other thing that solves a specific problem on your build. Note that this needs to be a suffix. There's no point using an essence that forces a prefix, because the next steps that we do are going to scramble all the prefixes on the item. Keep applying essences until your 3rd suffix is perfect if you're on a high budget. If you're on a medium budget, you want a tier 1 suffix, and for that suffix to be useful to your build, but maybe not the best one you could possibly roll. And if you're on a lower budget, then tier 3 plus and useful is the way you want to go. For instance, if you're on a low budget, you probably don't want to roll over 43% cold resistance, even if your character already has capped cold resistance, because your gloves, your new gloves, will take some pressure off other stats on your character. So where are we now? At this point, our suffixes are spell suppression and 2 good or great mods. Our prefixes are trash unless you got unusually lucky, and there are no Eldritch mods that matter on the item. You might have some there if your fractured base had them originally, but they're not going to be important. Our next step is going to be prefixes, and the path changes a lot depending upon your budget here. There's going to be quite different steps to follow on a low budget, a medium budget, and a high budget. So let's get the cheap one out of the way first. Here you want to apply a low tier Eldritch Ember. Your purpose here is to make the item Searing Exarch dominant. Now, if the item already has Eldritch mods on it, you might need to apply a bottom tier Eldritch Ichor at this point, and then a 2nd tier Eldritch Ember in order to make sure that the item is Searing Exarch dominant. The worst prefix that you can have is a low tier life roll. These make the item worse because they prohibit you from putting benchcraft life on the item. If you have one of these, you want to remove it with an Eldritch Chaos Orb or an Eldritch Annulment Orb. Once you've done that, benchcraft life if you're missing it, or benchcraft a useful Jun mod otherwise. If you've already got life, Jun has a lot of good mods that are available there, and there'll be one that's ideal for your build. So here, you probably aren't going to be on Dragon Scale Gauntlets, and you'll probably have 12% spell suppression, but this is otherwise an example of what you could expect here. You've got a reasonably useful suffix mod in Regenerate 81.13 life per second. You've got your prefix modifier crafted for 63 extra life, and you've got a prefix modifier that, although it's quite a high roll, isn't something that you particularly are chasing here. And that's going to be the end of your prefix work. Although, of course, you could exalt this item out. That's not something you need to do now. That's something you can do in a little while. Now, on a medium budget, we're going to be making limited use of the Suffixes Cannot Be Changed metamod. But we're not going to be paying 2 divines for it. we're going to use a wild Bristle Matron beast. These cost about 1.25 divines each now, and the way they work is that they apply a random metamod to an item. The 5 different metamods are cannot roll attack mods, cannot roll caster mods, can have up to 3 crafted mods, prefixes cannot change, and suffixes cannot change. Those of you that are familiar with these will recognize that of these, one of them is a prefix, suffixes cannot change, and 4 of them are suffixes. Because there's only one of them that's a prefix, it is the only valid option if you use a wild Bristle Matron in order to put a random metamod onto your gloves, assuming that your gloves have 3 prefixes organized. But we have 3 prefixes organized, and so this is there. So, make the item Exarch dominant. If your prefixes are full, apply an Eldritch Orb of Annulment to remove one of them at random. Then use the beast to apply suffixes cannot change, and apply a Veiled Chaos Orb to the item. Once you've done this, you will almost always have no more than 5 mods on the item. But if you do happen to have 6, it is an RNG Eldritch Annul at this point to try and strip one of them off. Now you'll have 4 or 5 mods on the item, and one of them will be a Veiled Prefix. At this point, you want to benchcraft something on to block things. The idea here of blocking is that it modifies what you can possibly get when you unveil the prefix. Now, use a physical to element conversion unless you actually want that on your character, and then all the phys to ele conversion mods will be banned, which will then increase your chances of rolling what you want. Repeat all of these steps until you're content with the item. Now, there are lots of good veiled mods that you can roll this way. Each specific one, even when you are not blocking any mods, is at least a 30% chance unless it's one of the ones that grants your character life, and those are about a 20% chance. However, when you do block all of those physical to element conversion mods, then this chances increase considerably, because remember that you get 3 different shots to hit things. Once you have done this and you've chosen a veiled mod and you're happy with the veiled mod you've got, at that point you want to benchcraft life, and then you will have a perfectly functional item. There'll be something like what you see on the right here. Okay, so what do we do different if we're on a high budget? Here, we're going to make extensive use of Eldritch crafting. We're going to be using Eldritch Chaos Orbs where they're available, and we can substitute Eldritch Annuls with Exalted Orbs, and those Exalted Orbs can be either Eldritch Exalts or Classic Exalted Orbs, but at the time I'm recording this video, doing this step with Eldritch Chaos Orbs is going to be the cheaper option. You're going to want to make the item Exarch dominant. Okay, so a quick note during editing that I made a stupid mistake here. And that is that every time that I refer to prefixes cannot change, what I actually meant to say is suffixes cannot change. So that's been fixed on the slide that you see here, but is not fixed in the rest of this section. Every time that I refer to the metamods, I am talking about suffixes cannot change. I'm not talking about prefixes cannot change. I never mean prefixes cannot change in this section. And of course, please feel free to laugh at me for this mistake. And then you're going to want to spam Eldritch Chaos Orbs or Eldritch Annuls and Exalts until you've got tier 1 life on the item. Now this is not cheap. This will take about 36 Eldritch Chaos Orbs on average, which is about 1,000 Chaos Orbs, and it can be more than that. If you've got 3 total prefixes, which is pretty rare, then your only chance to salvage this situation is to hit the item with an RNG Eldritch Annul, which if it removes your tier 1 life is going to also make you pretty sad. Now once you've done this, we're going to take a coin flip. And this is going to hurt because if you lose this next roll, you're going to be back to the start of this step. We're going to be putting prefixes cannot change on the item, which is going to be done through a wild Bristle Matron, same as on the medium budget. And then you're going to go for a 50-50 Ashling Slam on the item. Now, what you want to see here is that you get a veiled mod here. On average, your cost per success, I make out to be about 72 Eldritch Chaos, 2 Ashlings, and 2 wild Bristle Matrons. So this is ouch. This is going to cost quite a bit. Now, before you unveil, bench block a conversion mod unless your character wants conversion, in which case you're going to bench block something else. Alright, so now let's talk about the implicits. On a low budget, these are really simple. Spam lesser or greater Eldritch Icors until you've got spell suppression there, 5% or 6% depending on your budget. On average, it's going to cost you 19 lessers or 28 greaters in order to hit this once, although of course you can get unlucky. Now, you can then spam lesser, greater, and grand embers until you have something that is useful to your build, something that is worth keeping. Now, this could be +1 strike target, it could be rage gain, it could be damage over time multiplier, it could be attack speed. There are a lot of good mods that you can get here. It could even be something that you really desperately need, like Ignite Proliferation, that's very specific. It may take about 60 embers, which costs about 12C if you use the bottom tier ones, in order to get an exact mod. And if you use higher tier embers, it's both going to cost you more each attempt that you make, and also you're going to need more attempts because there start to be more things that enter in the pool as you get to higher tier embers. That said, every hit that you do make is going to be even better. So what about the non-budget approach to implicits? We're throwing budget to the wind, maybe you got an early mage blood and your character's really rich. Here what we want to do is elevate the most important mod for your character and consider elevating it twice. So first identify if there are any desired mods you have that have really important breakpoints. For example, strike skills target 2 additional nearby enemies is the exquisite and perfect tier, whereas the exceptional, grand, greater, and lesser tiers of that are just +1 to strike target. And that's actually non-Vaal strike skills, but in general it's pretty much the same thing. So there is a big breakpoint for this particular mod at exquisite tier. Perfect tier spell suppression, on the other hand, might be what you need in order to cap your character out at 100%, and if you only have exquisite, you're sitting at 99%. If you only have exceptional, you'd be sitting at 98%, and you might feel pretty sad about that. So, what you want to do firstly is use Grand Embers or Ichors in order to roll the lesser version of that critical mod, that essential mod. Then once you've done that, you want to apply an exceptional version of the opposite. So this might mean that you throw 60 Grand Embers at the item in order to get the grand tier version of non-Vaal strike skills target 1 additional nearby enemy. And then once you've got that, you then apply a single exceptional Ichor on the item without caring about what mod that rolls. Once you've done that, you want to apply Orbs of Conflict. Orbs of Conflict will pick one of the 2 mods that are on the item, one of the 2 implicit mods, and raise it in tier by 1, and it will drop the other one by 1 tier as well. However, Orbs of Conflict have a bias towards raising the lower tier mod. We don't know how strong this bias is. It's pretty noticeable. Now what I suggest you do, once you've got your grand tier of the mod you care about and your exceptional tier of the mod you don't care about, just spam Orbs of Conflict. In my experience, it takes about 4 of them on average in order to change that around so that you've got your exquisite tier of the mod you care about and you're down to a greater tier of the mod you don't care about. You might not get it in 4, but typically that's the amount that it takes me on average. Once you've got this, you need to decide, am I going for perfect tier? If you're going for perfect tier, then you'll have exquisite on the mod you want, and you'll have greater on the mod you don't want. You then want to apply another exceptional Ichor, or exceptional Ember, to replace the mod that you don't want that's greater tier with a new mod you don't want that is exceptional tier. And then once you've done that, you then apply another Orb of Conflict. This one is going to be biased against you, but you can keep trying. And in my experience, it takes about 6 Orbs of Conflict on average to go from having exquisite tier of the mod you want and exceptional tier of the mod you don't want to having perfect tier of the mod you want and just a grand tier of the mod that you don't care about. So once you've done this, you're going to be out about 10 Orbs of Conflict on average. At this point, your next step is going to be spamming grand or exceptionals on the other side, chasing the other mod that you desire. The lower your budget is, the less picky you should be. Finally, you're going to be in a situation where you've got perfect on one mod and exceptional on the other. If desired, you might decide that you want to use an Orb of Conflict to chase exquisite and exquisite, which is exactly what you see on this image here. And this is how you go about crafting the implicits on your gloves when you're not on a budget. So to conclude, the key thing here is that you want to treat this like a puzzle cube and do it in layers. The first layer is to get your suffixes done, the second layer is to get your prefixes done, and the third and final layer is to get your implicits done. If you do this, you can make yourself a decent set of gloves at a variety of different budgets. Of course though, one of the most important things you should always think about is, does my final product already exist on the market? Maybe someone made your dream gloves already earlier in the league, but they've got new dream gloves that are even better again, and they've now outgrown something that is exactly what you're looking for. If that's the case, you might be able to buy their cast-offs and you might be able to get yourself a very nice set of gloves without even having to craft it yourself. That's all I got on this. May your Orbs of Conflict have interesting results.